Good afternoon. It's WTIC. Todd Feinburg here with guests in studio, which is kind of a delightful thing because they are people who report to Hartford and fight to make things work there for you and don't necessarily succeed, but they're making slow progress. They're trying to make it work. Senator Joe Markley, Representative Rob Sampson. Guys, welcome to WTIC. I think I've got your mics on, so say something so I can...
Pleasure to be with you.
Yeah, glad to be here.
All right.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Good. I've got them on. We'll try to get the volume correct as we go. You both are representing the same region. You overlap in terms of districts, is that right?
State Senate districts are larger, so Rob's district is completely inside of mine, but we share Southington, my hometown, and Wolcott, which is his hometown.
Okay. And you're also philosophically aligned.
Oh, yes.
Both on the conservative side of things, both Republicans.
Republicans are the way they ought to be, in my opinion.
Indeed, and members of the conservative caucus in the legislature.
Yes, which Rob is the chair.
This is kind of fun because there's this perception. I don't know if you listen enough to notice, but there's this perception that there just isn't that much Republican influence in Hartford. And that it's all Democrats. And I keep telling people it's moving in the right direction, and it's moved pretty far. And it could move the rest of the way next year.
Right.
We definitely could get control of both chambers. And I think we've had some very feisty leadership from Len Fasano and Themis Claridis. And we also have a very strong, solid core of conservatives that has grown over the elections that Rob and I have been up there for, that I think has more and more influence within the caucuses.
All right, that's Senator Markley, just so people can get to know your voice. I'm trying to think of how to characterize that. It's got kind of, you sound a little bit like a Columbia English major when you speak.
A bald man. I sound like a bald man.
And Rob you're a realtor, right? Is that what you do in your spare time?
I do whatever it takes to make money so I can keep playing politics.
I know, but I like how you're always upset that work is getting in the way of your passion.
Indeed.
Yeah, you love the politics. Let's talk for a sec just about where the budget is, because everyone's upset about budget stuff. So maybe Rob, you know something this week?
Well, you've probably heard that we're expected to go in on the week of September 11th.
The 14th, is that the day?
That is the rumor that we're going to be in session on the 14th, but I'm told at least it's going to be the week of September 11th that a budget will be presented by the Democrat Speaker of the House, where it will be taken up first, and that budget has been gaining some attention in the press, mostly because it has a sales tax and a bunch of other types of taxes, luxury tax, smokeless tobacco tax, and so forth. I believe the Democrats believe at this point that the only way to pass a budget in the state is with tax hikes, and I would maintain that is unnecessary. The only thing now is to try and convince my colleagues that we can still put together a Republican alternative budget and offer it on that day that does not include any taxes and still fully funds the town, so that
to demonstrate how it can be done.
That is correct. Yeah, it's going to be a lot more difficult. I mean, since the labor package that I talked to you about the last time I was on has passed, it's considerably more difficult than it was in the past.
And it's hard to understand how they're looking for a big tax increase, right? It's is it $600 million each year, roughly? Is
nearly $1 billion
total?
When you add up what they got, the sales tax and the other things they've got thrown in this restaurant tax, and they're talking about all sorts of things.
$1 billion per year?
Yeah, $1 billion per year.
So that's a really different situation than you're saying you can make it work without the tax hike. How much lower would your spending be? Do you know these numbers? Are they available, or do you just hear little snippets like we do in the news?
It's kind of a mixture of both, and unfortunately, and Senator Markley will back me up on this, it's an unfortunate reality that you can't even get a straight answer to many of these questions.
When you ask directly yourself.
When you ask, how many state employees are there, you're going to get 14 different answers, and the question is, well, are you counting them by 40-hour work weeks, or are you counting them by actual bodies?
Oh, so they might use different criteria than one normally uses order to make the numbers tricky.
Right, and when it comes to the budget itself, the question is whether or not certain items are contained in what we might consider a budget this year versus last year, because now there are certain types of expenditures and income versus expenditures that happen completely off budget. So to find the actual number is a difficult thing to do.
Okay. I was asking Senator Fasano some of this yesterday, and I felt badly because I thought maybe he just isn't privy to the information, and I was putting him in an awkward position. It's hard for voters to understand that there's this kind of gamesmanship involved with what you would think would be that a year ago you come in with a budget and you spend the year kind of working on it like a term paper. Not like me when I was in college. I'd wait till the night before it was due and then I'd write all night to get a term paper done. It seems like they're more crammers and that always happens after the due date.
Well, the question keeps changing too, Todd. One of the problems is that the revenue projections keep going down. So we've had to come up with repeatedly revise the budget to make it fit. And then with the passage of the union contract extension, the Republican budgets, which found more savings in the union side than that contract permitted, now are stuck with that number. So everybody has had to retool the entire thing. I think in the Senate side, Senate Republican side, I think we've done 5 different versions, and we'll have to do a 6th in order to deal with the reality. We're hoping also that we end up with a united Republican version. We'll see what happens.
How would that happen?
Well, it's just a matter of the House and the Senate getting together on the same same document, which hasn't happened yet, but they're not too far apart.
Okay. So we have 2 Republicans here, Representative Rob Sampson, Senator Joe Markley. How is it possible to have a budget without tax increases? What gets cut?
Well, I would say I would invite people to look at the Senate Republican version, which is at ctsenaterepublicans.com. We've put out a line-by-line budget which shows exactly what the cuts would be, shows the changes in the municipal funding formula, which is good for some towns and not particularly bad for anybody, and that does not shred the social safety net. I think it's a good budget, but it makes substantial cuts in all kinds of different places. And I think Rob and I would both say that there are still cuts that can be made.
But can you give us like the big 3? What are the top?
What are the big 3, Rob? Can you give the big 3?
Well, I think there's still a substantial amount of savings to be gained through privatization and maybe moving some things that are traditionally done by the state to nonprofit organizations, private entities. There's going
to lower the cost?
That is exactly correct, yes. That becomes increasingly more difficult with the union package being passed, because now you can't modify the number of employees because you have this wage freeze and not the wage freeze, but the no layoff provision.
So even if you do privatize and find savings that way, if you can't eliminate the positions, there's no savings.
Yeah, but just moving so there's an elimination of a certain number of managers who are not part of that agreement. There is elimination of certain types of state agencies, consolidation of different organizations, and there's certainly cuts to entitlements.
Now you're talking.
Yeah, and that's what needs to happen at this point.
Yeah, well, so tell me about that. I'm dying to hear.
Well, this is the difficulty that we have even on the Republican side of the equation.
Nobody wants to do that.
Yes,
because there's going to be yelling and screaming. But don't you have to embrace the yelling and screaming? Isn't that where the glory in all this is? It seems to me, based on the WTIC callers, that's what everybody's waiting to hear. Who's going to stand up and say these things need to be cut? We don't have the money. It's not that I wouldn't love to give everybody more money. It's that we don't have it.
No, I couldn't agree more. Again, you're talking to 2 of the most conservative guys in the legislature, and we fully recognize that the state government has grown exponentially too large, and it's time to cut back both on the number and size and scope of state employees and on entitlements all across the board. When I got elected in 2011, the state budget was around $17 billion. I know that's a hard number to pin down exactly, but today it's like $26 billion. And how it could have increased 50% in that time frame is shocking to me. I think we could easily go back to what we had for a state budget back when I was first elected.
I thought the budget was $20 billion a year. Or are you adding in Is this some different way of doing the math, including federal numbers? Or
I'm including the Medicaid funding that is currently not factored as part of the budget, but was when I was first elected.
Yes, they keep changing they move things off budget. And the result of that is they can say, oh, look, the budget didn't grow that much because we're not counting that money anymore. This is why the much discussed spending cap is not the panacea that people think it would be, because there's always a way around it. The only solution is to have people that are willing to make tough decisions.
Were you surprised when you've been there a long time, right? You've had like 130 years or something.
No,
it's stunning how long you've been in the Senate.
No, you're so wrong. You're so wrong. Rob and I were both elected in 2010. The only difference is I served one lonely term back in 1984.
Oh.
So I came in in the Reagan landslide and then got slid back out in 86.
I see. You were a temporary employee.
I was out for 24 years and came back. And let me say, when I was there in 85, 86, the state budget was $3.7 billion.
I know. It's very quaint when you go back to those times.
Yeah.
And is that counting federal dollars or not counting federal dollars?
Yes, we were counting everything in those days.
Were you surprised when you first got there this time? Because you both went in 2011, is that what you're saying?
Right. Yeah.
When you guys got there, and Rob, especially you, since it was your first time, were you surprised that so much time and energy is spent on the part of those elected to represent their voters, the time they spend trying to deceive their voters?
That's a tough question. I mean, there are certainly people up there that are in it for something other than truly representing their constituents. But I would have to admit that even most of my Democratic colleagues, even though we might disagree with the methodology and what's best for the citizens of our state, I think they do have the best interests of their constituents at heart.
Well, that may be, but the way they get there,
they're wrong.
I mean,
of course.
No, I'm responding to what Senator Markley was saying, though, about 1 year it's a $20 billion budget and then it's a $26 billion. And why are they moving the goalposts? The only reason you move the goalposts is to make it confusing about how to score, right?
Right. And in the case of that specifically, the reason why was because of the spending cap. We were supposed to be abiding by a rule that would say we can only increase spending a certain amount per year. And the only way they could get around that spending cap was just not count some of the spending by putting it off the budget into a separate account.
Hey. Oh, I'm sorry. We've gone a little late. Mike, you want me to take a break now? Go straight down? Okay, we'll take it right down to the bottom. Sorry, you can continue if you want.
Dan Malloy is the deceiver in chief. Mm-hmm. He's the one that's made these decisions on the budgets that he's proposed to move things off. So it's not like I want to get my colleagues in the General Assembly off the hook, but I think most of those bad proposals have come from the governor's office. They've gone along with them, but it's easy to go along with. This is one reason. It's great. You need to have a Republican legislature, but really above everything, we need to have a Republican governor because the governor so sets the agenda. The legislature, to a large extent, is just is changing things around the margins, but it's very hard to govern from the legislature. It's the executive branch that runs things.
If you listened to Rush Limbaugh today, you would have heard him spending a chunk of time describing how Republicans were deliberately tricking their voters during the Obama years, that if only they were in control, that they would turn all this awful stuff back. And he said it was all a lie. They never intended to do it. And when they got power, it was upsetting to them because they had to figure out a new lie to tell that made the old one go away. And should voters feel confident that if total Republican control, if Connecticut goes from blue to red, this would be a stunning moment nationally if Connecticut went from blue to red, would they be able to trust that Republicans would come through?
I think that the only chance we have is for the Republicans to come through.
That's a different question, but it's also an interesting answer.
I can't guarantee it, but I think that circumstances are forcing us to recognize what has to be done in this state. And I feel pretty good about the possibility that any of the people we have running for governor on the Republican side, confronted with the kinds of problems we have in Connecticut, are going to end up doing the right thing, even if they're not quite as conservative going into as I'd like them to be. Mm-hmm. But I understand. And, I would say that it's not necessarily that legislators intend to let people down, But I do think there's a little bit of saying, give me the ball, and then when you get it, you say you panic.
I've never had the ball before. What do you do?
That's exactly right. And a little hard to come in and start running something. We don't have a lot of institutional memory of being in control of a party. It's not like we've got a bench of people that have already been commissioners and so forth. So there's going to be an adjustment. There's no other choice. This is the choice we have, is Republican or Democrat, and we know the Democrats are going to take us in the wrong direction. The Republicans, if all they have to do is stay true to their principles, and everything else will follow.
How often in politics do you see that happening, where elected officials stay true to their principles? I mean, doesn't the principle of survival take over when you get elected to public office? I
think that Rob and I would both say that it is by being true to our principles that we have survived. That once you can kind of get over that, once you take the plunge, people like it. People like the fact that you stand for something and that they can rely on you. And I think that we've got more people up there that are thinking that way. Our good friend John Fusco, who's a freshman from Southington, has kind of taken the plunge as well and has been a very strong, solid voice, because I think he sees that it works. It works as a way of governing, and it also works as a way to connect with your constituents.
We have Representative Rob Sampson here, Senator Joe Markley. And now you guys are in some legal trouble, and we'd like to try to help you out of it if we could. So that's why you're really here today, right? Can we get into that? You want to start setting that up?
I would prefer to try this case in the media or in the public domain any day of the week.
Well, you're here.
Indeed.
Let's try it. I'll be the judge.
Yeah, so where to begin, I guess. It goes back to 2014. We were involved in re-election campaigns, of course, at that time. And simultaneous to Senator Markley and I being on the ballot for re-election, so was Governor Malloy. And 2 weeks before the election, in the midst of us running our re-election campaigns and going out and greeting voters and sending out correspondence and mail and trying to gain support, we received a notification from our respective, Republican caucuses in Hartford saying that the SEEC, which is the State Elections Enforcement Commission, had come out with an advisory opinion, which is an interesting thing, which we should talk about, saying that it would be no longer allowed to mention someone who is not your direct opponent in your campaign mailings. And for us, that meant that we could no longer bring attention to Governor Malloy and his policies in our campaign correspondence. By that time, however, most of the campaigns, are already done putting together their entire campaign plan and developing their mail. And for the most part, most of it's already gone and been delivered. So a very difficult thing to do. Right after this advisory opinion was issued, 20 or so of our Republican candidates across the state also received similar complaints to what we received.
All right, so just to recap, the notification is from the state agency that handles state financing of elections.
That is correct.
Does everybody have to take that money?
No.
It's optional.
It is optional.
But pretty much everybody wants it because...
It's not so much about wants it. In fact, I'm a huge opponent of that plan. I would like it to go away entirely. I've offered bills to remove and eliminate the public financing of political elections. The problem is that they've set up the rules in a way that the only way you can compete is by participating in it.
Because of fundraising, the limits of how much you have to raise in this amount. And
That's correct. They set up requirements for where you can raise money from, the maximum amount you can raise, and they do it in such a way that if you are not going to participate in that citizens election program, you are at a tremendous disadvantage. In fact, a disadvantage you could probably not overcome.
So the guys who run this issued decrees saying that you couldn't, they wanted to limit your free speech, your free political speech. And campaigns are about criticizing the opposition. And they wanted to say you guys can't use the money to spend it on advertising materials that criticize the opposition. So that's what we're going to talk about. I guess a bunch of people faced this and everyone else settled. And you guys didn't, being the stubborn guys that you are. So we're going to talk about that coming up. Representative Rob Sampson, Senator Joe Markley. I'm Todd Feinberg. Stay with us. WTIC. All right. Todd Feinberg here, Wednesday afternoon. We have Rob Sampson here. He's a state representative. Senator Joe Markley here as well. and we are talking. They're both Republicans, and I want to try to get this out in as short a statement as possible so everyone grasps it. The agency that controls spending on elections, whether you use the state money or money you've raised separately, you're all controlled by these same rules. And the rules they've decided make it wrong for you to attack in your campaign literature in the last election cycle to attack the governor. Is that right?
2014, not the last cycle.
Okay, yes. 2014. So, yes, because the governor was running. And this is a really bizarre thing to me because freedom of speech is about primarily freedom of political speech. The idea that you would create a state program to fund elections is so that you can censor speech would seem to be problematic when you get into the courts. And they've come down on you guys and a bunch of other members of the legislature who have, has everyone else caved in and just signed an agreement to avoid litigation, and you guys are litigating because you're...
Because we think there's a principle involved that has to be defended. And the deal that they offered, and to us as well, was basically you confess that you
have sinned.
And you're off the hook. And
with no fine or anything.
With no fine. And the two of us...
There's no punishment.
Right.
No.
Except a promise not to do it again, which is
not to attack your political opponents in future campaigns.
And Todd, I'll say the word attack even. What I said about Malloy, I said I opposed his tax hikes. I don't even know that that's an attack on Malloy. In fact, one might say that the majority of the legislature liked his tax hikes. So it's a statement of fact as opposed to any... Yeah. I didn't say Dan Malloy is a son of a gun. I said I opposed his tax hikes. I opposed his reckless spending. I mean, it was not there was nothing personal. I didn't say he shouldn't be governor. Don't vote for him.
Right. Which you should have the right to say because this is America. It used to be America anyway. I don't know if it's still America, but it used to be America. And you used to be encouraged to speak at will.
You know, one of the things that bothers me is that really there's three of us that are brought into jeopardy by this, because my treasurer, also out of principle, refused to sign, even though she didn't make a decision about anything. She signed the checks, but she's still responsible. And they sent us a rather nasty communication today. We asked if she'd have to show up at the hearing because, what's she going to say? What are they going to ask my treasurer? Did you sign this check? Yes. Well, that's all been stipulated. Mm-hmm. And they said she has to show up, and we will enforce the subpoena. And she is and whatever deal we offered her is off the table, and she is at risk of substantial civil penalties. And she's done nothing wrong, and I really think it's just a bullying tactic holding her as a hostage.
So this is really gross, and that's what I wanted the audience to have a chance to hear, that this is an awful thing for a state agency to do, and I think an indication of why everybody should have a knee-jerk response when it's a tie, when you're trying to decide, does this sound like a good thing for the government to do? If it means an expansion of government power, it means bad things are going to happen, that more power in the hands of government means people's rights are violated. And that's what's going on with you gentlemen right now. Is that fair?
It's absolutely fair. I mean, and this is bordering on harassment. What you just mentioned is a whole separate conversation about the size and scope of government involving itself in elections. And now, because they set up this program, they now have the ability to control that program and therefore set limits on speech. To me, that's why you do away with it to begin with. But living under their rules is fine as long as they stick to the rules. The actual statute that underlies all of this is a very simple statute, which basically says that you are allowed to spend money on things that promote your campaign. Mm-hmm. And what they have done is they've perverted that, and they did it out of the fear of Democrat candidates facing tough elections. Shortly before the 24 election day of November 4th, they issued this advisory opinion on October 17th, 2 weeks before, basically...
in 2014.
In 2014, yeah. Mm-hmm. Basically expanding that definition of you can spend money to promote yourself and your campaign to say now you can only... you cannot do anything unless it directly relates to your own race, and you cannot promote the defeat of or attack another candidate. And then they've perverted that definition to include a mere mention or statement of fact that includes the governor's name. And that's what we're faced with. And it's ridiculous. And at this point, they have applied so much pressure to all of the other people facing the same circumstance that they've all caved. Every one of them has signed that same agreement. Again, probably an easy thing to do, to sign an agreement that says that there's no penalty.
No, but this is a real problem in America today. First, that laws get passed that say we're going to give this vague, amorphous power to this little group of people, and they can make up rules to achieve the goals that we're setting forth in this law. And when you do that, you're effectively giving unelected people a lawmaking power, and they fabricate laws, and they deliberately will do things that are wrong, that are against our values, in order to reach political goals. And you're saying you've got evidence that that's what was going on here, right? That they were. You've got a letter. Is that what it is? Can we talk about what it is you have?
Well, my understanding of this is Rob mentioned that the decision, or the advisory opinion, came out on October 17th. It was in response, as I understand it, to a letter from the Democratic State Central Committee the day before. And they asked for an advisory opinion and not for a declaratory judgment. A declaratory judgment would be their usual procedure, which would have required a hearing and a conversation and a decision by the commission. They didn't have time to do that before Election Day. So they instead went for this advisory opinion, which meant that nobody had the possibility of coming in and saying, wait a second, if you do this, does this really make sense? I mean, for instance, if I attacked Dan Malloy, was I helping Tom Foley? You could argue I was helping Joe Visconti. He was on the ballot against Dan Malloy too, Or
even Jonathan Pelto, who was another liberal candidate.
A liberal candidate, exactly. Or I keep wanting to say, if I had run a picture of me and Malloy at a opening of a new building, would I then have to have made a contribution to put it down as a contribution to Malloy's campaign? It hadn't been thought through, but they did it in response to a request by the Democrats. They did it instantly. They did it so quickly that it seems impossible that there wasn't communication before the letter and the judgment were made.
Okay, so when is this hearing happening?
The hearing is tomorrow. So it begins at 10 o'clock, and I suspect it will go all day, and I suspect it'll go a little longer than that, in fact, because given the attitude they've taken, we've got more questions we want to pursue, too.
Do you want people to come?
It's
a public hearing?
It is a public hearing, and we certainly hope the press is going to cover it. I think there's some people with an interest in it. And we're going to be able to speak. We'll be under oath, and we'll be questioned as witnesses, but we're willing to speak pretty freely in that situation.
Oh, good. Where's this happening?
It's happening in the offices of the State Elections Enforcement Commission on Trinity Street up in Hartford.
And they have a decent room to hold, if we can deliver a crowd of people?
I've never been on the dock there before, so I'm not sure how big their room is, but I think they're obliged to try to accommodate anyone who shows up.
Oh, that's great. I'll be there.
Okay, come on up.
Yeah, let's see what we can learn about this. I love diving inside of the the
belly of the beast.
Yeah, the real ugly parts.
Yeah.
Those dark places where all the smelly stuff is. All right, if you want to talk to our guests, you may. Representative Rob Sampson, Senator Joe Markley, 860-522-9842. And Stephen is in Hartford. Hi, Stephen.
Good afternoon, Todd.
Good afternoon, Stephen.
I agree that your guests, by virtue of their participating in the public funding of campaigns, have been subjected to unconstitutionally impermissible restraints on their language and on their ability to campaign. I wonder, and I gather you share that opinion as well, so I ask all three of you, do you likewise believe that same legislation that purports to prohibit the granting of public funds to convicted felons such as Joseph Ganim is likewise unconstitutional, and do your guests believe that Joseph Ganim should, if he otherwise meets the criteria for public financing, be entitled to receive public financing, notwithstanding his felony conviction?
What's your opinion on it?
My opinion is unconstitutional is unconstitutional. If Joseph Ganim is constitutionally and statutorily eligible to run for governor, which he is, then the mere fact that he has been convicted of a felony for misconduct in public office, which the statute therefore eliminates, makes him ineligible for public financing, and he's permitted to run for governor, and I think he should be entitled to receive public financing. So I'd like to hear from your guests about that.
All right, we'll
if they don't believe that Ganim is entitled to public financing, what's the principle that makes the State Election Enforcement Commission's conduct relative to them unacceptable, but the restraints on Joseph Ganim's ability to get public financing acceptable?
That's exactly where I want to go to with it, too. Thank you, Stephen, for the call. You guys have... Well, go ahead, Joe.
Okay, and I've never been asked that before, so I'm going to have to answer it off the top of my head. First, I would make this distinction, which is it is explicit in statute about this question of people convicted for a felony being eligible, as I understand it. That's not
right.
Simply
He said
there
wasn't a statute, but
he said there wasn't a statute.
But there is a rule that says if you're a convicted felon, you can't. But
I think it may be clearer than it is in our case, where this is all we have is this advisory opinion, which, in my opinion, is them saying we think this, and then they try to enforce it on us. All that said, I tend to agree with the caller that if you set up a program like this, if Ganim is eligible to run for governor,
then that eligibility should include the public funding.
I'm afraid so, as far as it goes, and I think this is probably an argument against the public funding generally. That when you go to public funding, you're going to get into situations like this that you don't like, and either the government is going to be heavy-handed, or you're going to have to put up with the fact that you have to give public money to Ganim.
Yeah, I would be forced to agree also, and it's simply a matter of whether or not someone could gain the support of the public to get elected. That should be the ultimate determination, not some legalese or some restriction.
Yeah, I mean, the point of elections is to let voters decide who is eligible and who is the best of those who are eligible, all in one shot.
Yep.
Rather than to let hidden hands make decisions like this, and the hidden hands always seem to find a way to reach in.
Yeah, they're going to have
to tamper with the process.
Certainly, they're going to have an impact on the outcome, and it's not in keeping with the notion of actual representation based on our principles as Americans.
860-522-9842, Representative Rob Sampson, Senator Joe Markley. We continue in just a moment.
Weekdays 9 till noon on WTIC News Talk 1080 and WTIC.com.
Good afternoon. Todd Feinburg with you till 6 o'clock here this hour. Representative Rob Sampson, Senator Joe Markley. They are Republicans. They have been told that they did something wrong when they included a mention of the governor in their campaign literature that violated the rule somehow, an unwritten rule, an interpretive rule of the state commission that decides, that controls the handing out of state dollars to candidates. And it just seems grotesque, and you guys challenged what others went along with and just signed off on an agreement not to do the bad thing again. But you didn't do a bad thing. You just did normal campaigning. So you decided to fight it. Tomorrow you have a hearing, 10 a.m. Tell people where that is again.
It's at Trinity Street, the offices of the State Election Enforcement Commission in Hartford.
All right, if you're a real crank, or if you just love fights, political fights, and you love going to tedious meetings that take hours, that would be the place to be tomorrow.
It might actually be interesting. There's people in the general public. It's probably going to start out slow because they're going to read, they're going to go through a whole bunch of stipulations to say, I am Joe Markley and I am a state senator and all that stuff. But at a certain point, we are going to get to the issues, and Rob and I will speak quite frankly about them.
That's a promise.
When you get a chance.
When we get the chance.
When they're done with the going through all the pedantic stuff. All right, what else do you want people to know?
About this case?
This or something else? Up to you.
Rob Sampson, anything you want people to know?
You've got like 2.5 minutes left.
I would say simply that I was not embarrassed at any point in my political career to be an opponent of the governor of the state's policies, Governor Malloy specifically. And I ran on the notion that people in my district would appreciate the fact that I opposed his policies, and I was doing that to further my own campaign election, not necessarily to damage the governor himself. And I'd like to know from your listeners.
But there shouldn't be anything wrong with damaging the governor.
Yeah, no, I agree with that too. But
he plays for the other team.
Indeed.
But that wasn't what we were up to.
Yeah.
We were just trying to get reelected and damage our opponents, let's say. And it's a very useful tactic. It worked, as I said in the paper, for my friend John Fusco running against a very popular Democratic incumbent in Southington. The whole campaign was to link Dave Zoney, who's personally a very nice guy, to Dan Malloy, who no one can stand. Well, and it worked.
But elected people spend a lot of time trying to convince voters that they're not connected to things they are connected to.
That's right.
It's your job as their opponent to create the links.
The question is, how relevant is that to a voter in either one of our elections? How we feel about the governor's policies. Is that relevant to voters?
Well, I hope it is.
I would hope so, too. I think there's nothing more relevant, and that's the argument that we're trying to make. And the state's
trying to tell you shouldn't be putting that in your literature. It's unbelievable.
Yes, it is ridiculous, and that's one reason. I love taking fights on when I know the other side's position is ridiculous, so that's how I feel about this one. And I would also say that anyone who wants to receive my hit videos should go to senatormarkley.com and sign up.
For hit videos or for all your videos? And there might be an occasional hit in there.
My video updates or anything else you can find out from us. And Rob, I know, has a website as well.
Yeah, my website is Sampson4ct.com.
And what's yours?
SenatorMarkley.com.
Okay. I've seen your videos. I guess you weren't dancing in the one I saw.
No, you maybe just have to watch it over again.
All right, so that's what they're up to tomorrow. I'm going to go at 10 a.m. because I want to see, at least, as long as I can stand it. I don't have a lot of patience for bureaucrats wasting people's time.
Yeah.
But it's for a good cause, so I'm going to give it a try.
They will waste even more time if they know you're there, Todd.
You think?
Yes.
Good. Well, I'll say it again. I'll be there at 10 a.m. tomorrow. Tell us once more where it is.
It's on Trinity Street in Hartford, just across the street from the Capitol on the same side as Bushnell Auditorium.
Okay, which parking lot should people use?
You could park in the Legislative Office building next to the Armory. It's a little bit of a walk, but that's probably the easiest free parking.
Okay. Good. And any other things going on that if you just want to give a notice to your...
Hey, people know I've been talking about this tax on home heating oil and propane, and that too you can see at senatormarkley.com. But that is a scary proposal, something they've never taxed in the past. And again, if people start speaking out against it, before you know it, it's going to be on your bill.
All right. Thank you guys for being here. Senator Markley, Representative Sampson. Good luck with your exercise tomorrow. You don't think it'll be concluded tomorrow? It'll continue.
I think we are starting to think we have some things we want to find out about, too.
So you're going to do a little research. You're not in a hurry to resolve it. This is good. A big, long fight coming up.